I'm Chauncey Navarro. Welcome back to Inspired Word, where we're doing our trip through the Bible, through the revelation of Jesus. We're in chapter 4. We're just starting chapter 4 today. And this is kind of a new position here as far as in the book, because in chapter 1 he said, write the things that you have seen, the things that are, and the things that will be hereafter. Now in chapter 4 we start the things hereafter. The things that he'd seen were chapter 1. The things that were chapter 2 and 3, the letters to the churches. And now this one starts with the same Greek word metatauta, the things hereafter. So he says on this, after these things I looked, and behold, a door in heaven open. And the first voice that I heard, that was like a trumpet, saying with me, come up here, and I will show you things that will take place after this. Immediately I was in the Spirit, and there was a throne set in heaven. And the one that sat on the throne was like jasper, or like sardius stone in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne, in appearance like an emerald. And around the throne were 24 thrones, with 24 elders who had crowns and white robes and on their heads, and white robes and crowns on their heads. And the thrones, and out of the throne proceeded lightnings and thunders and voices. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which were the 7 spirits of God. Before the throne there was a sea of glass like crystal, and in the midst of the throne and around the throne were 4 living creatures, full of eyes, front and back. And the living creature, the first one was like a lion, and the second one was like an ox or a calf. The third one had the face of a man, and the fourth one was like an eagle flying. And the 4 living creatures, each having 6 wings and full of eyes all around and within, they would not rest day or night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Throne of God that John's caught up before on here and stuff. You have a couple of different things on there. First of all, the layout of the throne of God. The Bible tells you that the tabernacle that was built on earth, the temple that was done on earth, were modeled off of what was in heaven. And so you see a pattern that's in here in terms of this throne of God in heaven. And so the layout is going to relate to that in a similar manner. And I've got a couple of different areas that I'm going to be covering here as we go over this. One of them is going to be the layout of the tabernacle. And in terms of, it tells you, you see in the Old Testament where it talks about God's throne on the sides of the north. Well, on the north side of the tabernacle was the table of shewbread with the 2 loaves and the 2 crowns. What I'm going to present to you is that table with the bread from heaven, which is Yeshua, with the 2 crowns, a crown for the Father and a crown for the Son, represents the throne of God. And that straight across from it was the menorah, the 7 lamps that are burning in this one, which is right before the throne. So you can see where it's actually positioned correctly. And then to the right of that would have been the altar of incense, which was where the prayers of the saints are offered up. And then what you had farther to the right of that would have been the Ark of the Covenant, and with the mercy seat. So now this is the layout the way I've got it here. And then before this you had the laver that was before you went to the inner court, and that would relate to the sea of glass that you had. Now the sea of glass, the waters there represent the people. So this multitude is also the sea of glass that's there. And later on you're going to see where the sea of glass changes some. That's farther in the book. As we're going in here, so this is the way this is laid out here, with the 24 thrones around it, relating to the compartments in Solomon's, the chambers around it from Solomon's temple, the second temple. Now, in this manner that we're going to have right here, I'm going to go over to, and I'm going to go from this point to the 4 cherubim around the throne. Now, in the mercy seat, you do have a picture where God resided over the Ark of the Covenant and the mercy seat between the 2 cherub. That's relating to the actual cherub that are around his throne here. Now you have 4 cherubs, so it's 1 on each corner. Now if you correlate what you're looking at from the description here of John to what Ezekiel describes in chapter 1 and chapter 2 over there, you see some subtle differences. And so this is where I bring up this chart here on the cherubim, where I show a comparative chart of the difference between the Ezekiel cherubim and the cherubim in this book in chapter 4 of the Revelation of Jesus. First of all, in Ezekiel's, the cherubim have 4 wings, but they're on earth. And it almost kind of makes sense because 4 is the signature of the world. You have 4 seasons, 4 corners of the earth. Whereas in here, up in heaven, you have 6 wings. Now, on Ezekiel's, he describes them with a little more detail. It tells you they have the hands of a man, the legs of a calf, that 2 of the wings cover the body, and that with 2 of the wings they fly. Now, on the Revelation one over here, one of the differences also is Ezekiel describes them as having 4 faces. The face of a lion, the face of an ox, the face of a man, and the face of an eagle. Now, you get those same 4 faces, but it's only describing each one of them having that face here. Now, with my chart, the way I relate it is that when you've got the 6 wings, that if you had the 2 wings behind the other 2 that he was flying with, you'd only see 4 wings. If those wings were lifted up, they would cover the other faces, which is why you're only seeing 1 face in the one there. So I relate this that these are the same cherubim from Ezekiel that you're seeing here with these living creatures in chapter 4. Now, I've heard different people talk about, well, maybe it's describing satellites, how you have the 6 wings and like that. No, it says living creatures, and they're around the throne. They're not orbiting the earth. So it's a totally different picture here. Besides that, you actually have this picture of this in the Mazzaroth, which I don't know how many people are familiar with the Mazzaroth in here. The Mazzaroth or Mazzaroth. It's referred to in scriptures. It says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Well, God says, can you tie the bands of Orion? Can you loose the Pleiades? I named them all. So who named the constellations? Who named the stars? He says, I know every one of them by name. God did. He's the one that set the names. Now, before it got perverted to what we now know as the zodiac, it was originally a mural of biblical prophecy. And if any of you get a chance, you might want to take a look at some of the books out there like Witness in the Stars by E.W. Bullinger or some other ones that are tied to the Mazzaroth. They're very good books. But it's basically of how God painted in the stars a mural of biblical prophecy. And unfortunately, the enemy got a hold of it, perverted it, changed it into an idolatry where people would be directing their lives by the stars. So like when you're born has nothing to do with these in there. This is the perverted version that God put in there, where people are directing their lives by their horoscopes and the stars, which is an idolatry. That's not what I'm talking about. Now, going back to what I was saying about the Mazzaroth on there, if you go into a synagogue in Jerusalem, you're going to see zodiac symbols in the tile, and you think, wow, what are zodiac symbols doing in the tile of a synagogue? Well, it starts making sense when you start realizing that these same symbols were the banners over the 12 tribes of Israel. And each of them related to the prophecies, either of Jacob, how he prophesied over his sons, where he said that Judah is a lion, Leo, the lion of the tribe of Judah, or Reuben's unstable as water, Aquarius, the water bearer, and so on, going around the zodiac there. That the zodiac symbols that they had there were actually the banners over these tribes. And some of them related to the banners from the prophecies that Moses gave over the tribes, some to Jacob. But nonetheless, you had these symbols that represented for the banners going on. You had Aries, the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. You had, it said Joseph was a bull, and Ephraim and Manasseh were the 2 horns. Virgo, the virgin birth, showing the signs of fertility. Sagittarius, the horseman with the drawn bow, the first horseman in the book of the Revelation of Jesus. As you go around this, you start seeing all the prophecy coming alive in there. Well, what I found real interesting on this more than anything else was that if you take the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the spring solstice, and the fall solstice, that they would correlate with the main tribes that were around the tabernacle. You had the tribe of Judah, which was the lion. You had the tribe of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, which was the bull. You had the tribe of Reuben, which was the water bearer, Aquarius, the man. And then The fourth one you had, the tribe of Dan. Well, Dan was a serpent, but, he didn't want to be associated with the serpent, that represented sin. So what he did is he had an eagle clutching the serpent. Now, just above Scorpio is Agila, the eagle. And so that was the symbol there that you had, and those were the four faces of the four cherubim around the throne. Now, God says the earth is his footstool. So what you start seeing here is that these four cherubim were around the equator, followed the equator, were around the earth in the same layout around God's throne that you have in heaven. So my hypothesis or my theory was, since Isaiah tells you that the seraphim are over the throne, and I knew seraphim from the Hebrew translates fiery flying serpents, I figured if I looked over the North Pole, the constellation would be a fiery flying serpent. And the constellation over the North Pole is Draco the dragon, so I was correct. And that's what this chart depicts right here. Now, moving on ahead on here, in verse 9 we go on to say, whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders would fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever and ever, and cast their crowns before him, the throne, saying, You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For you have created all things, and by your will they exist and were created. Anyway, this is chapter 4 in its entirety in here. I've covered over a lot here in terms of the layout of heaven, in terms of the throne of God, in terms of the Mazzaroth and how it's depicted within this as well. As we get into chapter 5 is going to be going a little bit deeper in terms of the kinsman redeemer law and who the 24 elders are. So I'll see you back here at Inspired Word, where we're doing our in-depth study going through the book of the Revelation of Jesus. Thank you.